There's something nobody warns you about when you fall in love with a woman who has a close family. They tell you it's a blessing. They say, you're lucky, she comes from good people. She knows how to love because she was loved. And maybe that's true. Maybe that's true, it starts out that way. But what they don't tell you is that some families don't know where they end and where you begin. Some families see a wedding and think, expansion, more territory. Another person under the roof of their influence. I was 41 when I married my wife. Old enough to know better, people might say. And maybe they're right. But I want you to understand something before I get into all of it. I wasn't naive. I wasn't some young kid swept up in romance who ignored the red flags because the girl was pretty. I was a grown man with a career, a mortgage, a decade of independent living behind me. I thought that counted for something. Her name is Sylvie. We met at a mutual friend's dinner party on a cold November evening, and she laughed at something I said before I even finished the sentence. And that was it for me. She had this warmth about her, this openness, like she genuinely wanted to know everything about you. We talked until the other guests left, and then we talked some more on the porch in our coats, breath fogging in the air. By the time I drove home that night, I already knew I was in trouble. We did it for 2 years before I proposed. 2 good years. We argued sometimes the way adults do, but it was always clean. No cruelty, no scorekeeping. She worked as a dental hygienist and spent her weekends restoring old furniture she bought at estate sales. I taught high school history and coached junior varsity soccer. We were different in the right ways and the same in the ways that mattered. Her mother's name is Beverly, and I want to be precise about this because I've spent a long time trying to be fair. Beverly is not a cruel woman. She isn't a villain in the way that word usually gets used. She's a 64-year-old woman who raised Sylvie essentially alone after her husband passed when Sylvie was 12. She worked 2 jobs, made sacrifices, poured everything she had into her daughter. I understood that. I respected it. What I didn't understand, what took me years to fully see, is that somewhere along the way, Beverly had made Sylvie into her whole world. And when Sylvie got married, Beverly didn't let go. She just renegotiated the terms. The first real moment I noticed something was off was about 3 months into our marriage. We were planning a long weekend trip to the coast, just the 2 of us, our first real getaway as a married couple. I had the hotel booked, had asked for Friday off from work, had the whole thing mapped out. 2 days before we were supposed to leave, Sylvie came to me with that particular careful expression I would eventually learn to recognize. "Mom's not feeling well," she said. "I think we should postpone." I asked what was wrong. She wasn't sure exactly. Her mom had mentioned chest tightness, some dizziness. She thought maybe she should stay close just in case. We canceled the trip. Beverly felt better by Saturday. I told myself it was a coincidence. People get sick. Mothers worry their daughters. That's normal. But then it happened again 2 months later. Different trip, same pattern. And then again with a dinner I'd planned for our anniversary. Each time the timing was startling. Each time the illness was vague and then quickly resolved. Once the plans were off the table, I didn't say anything for a while. I was new to this marriage and I didn't trust my own read on things. I thought, maybe I'm being uncharitable. Maybe I'm looking for a pattern that isn't there because I want someone to blame for being disappointed. So I watched instead, and what I watched was this. Beverly called Sylvie every morning, usually before either of us had finished our first cup of coffee. The calls lasted 30 minutes on average, sometimes longer. Whatever Beverly said on those calls had a measurable effect on my wife's mood for the rest of the day. On the mornings Beverly was upset or anxious about something, Sylvie was distracted, slightly unreachable, like a part of her had gotten pulled across town to wherever her mother was sitting. I want to tell you about the Sunday dinners because that's where it really started to crystallize. Beverly lived about 20 minutes from us. We started having dinner there every other Sunday, which seemed fine at first, generous even. Home-cooked meals, familiar comfort. Gradually, every other Sunday became every Sunday. Then Beverly started calling Sylvie on Fridays to confirm. Then she started getting visibly wounded if we ever had to cancel, even for legitimate reasons like illness or my school events. Once I missed a Sunday because I had to cover a colleague's coaching duty, and Beverly didn't speak warmly to me for 3 weeks. Not outright cold, just that specific kind of pointed politeness that communicates disappointment more clearly than anger ever could. I tried talking to Sylvie about it. She just loves spending time with us, Sylvie said. I know, I said, but I think she gets upset in a way that isn't really fair when we can't make it. Sylvie frowned. She's alone, though. She doesn't have anyone else. And there it was. That sentence became the explanation for everything. Deployed every time I raised a concern. She doesn't have anyone else, as if that responsibility fell entirely on us. As if Sylvie's life, our life, existed in service of filling that absence. I didn't push it. Not then. The bigger conflict started over something that sounds small. Beverly's key to our house. I came home from school one Tuesday to find a casserole dish on the counter and the faint smell of cleaning product in the bathroom. Sylvie was at work. No one had been home. "Did your mom come by today?" I asked when Sylvie got home. "Oh yeah," she said, completely unbothered, opening the fridge. "She wanted to drop off dinner. She has a key." I stood there for a moment. "Since when?" "I gave her one a while back. In case of emergencies." I kept my voice even. "When were you going to mention that?" She looked at me then, recognizing something in my tone. "I didn't think it was a big deal." "It is a big deal. This is our home." She was inside our home when neither of us was here, and I didn't know about it. What followed was the first real argument of our marriage, and it ended the way most of our arguments would end, with Sylvie retreating to the bedroom, calling her mother, and emerging 20 minutes later with a slightly different posture. More defensive, more certain. Whatever doubt she'd had when she first saw my expression had been processed and resolved by the time she came back, and not in the direction of understanding my concern. "Mom says you're making her feel unwelcome." I looked at my wife carefully. "I didn't say anything to your mother. You made me feel like I'd done something wrong for wanting her to have access to us." "Access to us," I repeated. "Not access to our house while we're both at work." She shook her head. "You're making this into something bigger than it is." I asked her to return the key. "You said she would think about it." Beverly kept the key. I want to be honest here. I handled some of these conversations badly. I got sarcastic a few times when I shouldn't have. I said things in frustration that came out sharper than I intended. I'm not holding myself up as the wronged party who did everything right, but I want to be equally honest about the pattern I was watching develop, because this is the part I think about most. The slow, methodical way my opinions and concerns got filtered through Beverly before being handed back to me, transformed. It went like this. I raised a concern with Sylvie. Sylvie called Beverly. Beverly told Sylvie how to understand the concern, usually as insecurity or selfishness or me not being used to close families. Sylvie returned to the conversation armed with that interpretation, and because I was arguing against both of them without Beverly being in the room, I always seemed like I was overreacting. The financial thing started in our third year. Beverly's furnace broke down in January. It was genuinely urgent. She couldn't stay in the house in those temperatures, and I didn't hesitate. We helped cover the repair costs. I was glad we could. But in the weeks after, Beverly started mentioning to Sylvie that she was worried about her roof, her car, various things. Each mention reached me through Sylvie as a concern we should probably look into. When I asked why Beverly didn't have emergency savings for these things, the conversation immediately became about Beverly's difficult life, the sacrifices she'd made, the fact that she'd done it all alone. "She's not asking for anything," Sylvie said. "She's just worried." "She's asking through you," I said. "And you're asking through me." That was apparently the wrong thing to say. The detail that finally cracked something open in me happened on a Saturday morning. I was at the kitchen table going through our monthly budget. I handled most of our finances, which Sylvie was happy to leave to me. I had a folder open, statements spread out, and I stepped away to answer the door. When I came back, Sylvie was at the table. The folder was opened differently than I'd left it. "Were you looking through these?" I asked. A half-second pause. "Mom called while you were at the door. She asked about our savings situation." I closed the folder slowly. "She asked, and you looked. She's trying to figure out if we have enough cushion in case she needs help with something." I stood there and felt the specific chill of understanding something you've been almost understanding for a long time. This wasn't Beverly being concerned. This was Beverly conducting an audit through my wife. I said, very carefully, "Our financial information is private. It's not something to share without asking me." Sylvie's chin went up. "She's my mother, and I'm your husband. That has to mean something." She called Beverly from the bathroom. When she came back, I was sitting in the same spot. "Mom says you're secretive about money because you're afraid she'll see how you really manage things." I didn't respond to that. There was nothing to respond to. A few weeks later, I changed where I kept the financial files. Looking back, there was a day I should have marked as the beginning of the end, though I didn't recognize it then. It was an ordinary Wednesday evening. We were watching television, and I noticed Sylvie glancing at her phone with an expression I'd come to associate with Beverly. A slight tightening around her eyes, a pulling inward. "What's going on?" I asked. Mom's having a hard night. She's been crying. About what? She says she feels like she's losing me. I sat with that. What does that mean? She says since we got married, you've been pulling me away from her. I didn't raise my voice. I remember that distinctly. I spoke quietly and clearly. I have never once asked you to see your mother less. I have never said a negative word about her to her face. I have asked for basic privacy in our home and our finances, and somehow that's become me pulling you away from her. Sylvie didn't answer. Do you believe that? I asked. Do you actually believe I'm the problem here? She looked at the television. I think it's complicated. After that night, I started to feel it more distinctly. The loneliness of being inside a marriage where you're outvoted. It wasn't dramatic. There was no single terrible incident. It was just the accumulation of 100 small moments where I could feel the decision had already been made somewhere else before I was consulted. We'd be discussing vacation plans, and Sylvie would say, Mom thinks the beach would be better before I'd finished describing the cabin I'd found. We'd be working through something small, and I'd see her reach for her phone, and I'd feel the conversation shifting. The terms being reset, my words about to be translated into Beverly's language and sent back to me. I became quieter. I worked more. I found reasons to be at school late, grading papers that could have waited, prepping lessons I could have done at home. Not because I didn't want to be home exactly, because I'd started dreading the particular texture of the evenings, the sense of being present, but not quite the primary person in the room. The clearest breaking point, the moment I can point to and say that was it, happened in the fall of our 4th year. My school was doing a fundraiser dinner. Nice event. Faculty and their partners raised money for the arts program. I'd been on the planning committee, had put in real time and effort over the course of months. It mattered to me. I asked Sylvie weeks in advance to keep that Friday evening free. She came to me on the Wednesday before with that careful expression. Mom's not doing well. She had a really bad anxiety episode yesterday. I think I should stay with her Friday. I looked at her for a long moment. I've asked you to keep this evening free for a month and a half. I know, but she needs me. She has anxiety episodes fairly regularly, I said, and they tend to coincide with times when you have plans. Sylvie's eyes went hard. That's a horrible thing to say. Maybe. But you know it's true. She's not doing it on purpose. I didn't say she was doing it on purpose. I didn't say she was doing it on purpose. I said it happens, and it's a pattern, and I need you to be there Friday. I can't just leave her when she's like this. You can, I said. You choose not to. That's different. She called Beverly, came back 20 minutes later. Mom says you've been resentful of her for years, and this is just the latest example. I didn't go to my own fundraiser dinner alone. I went to Beverly's house and had a quiet, polite, excruciating evening watching my wife take care of her mother's emotional needs, while mine sat unattended in the corner. That night, driving home, I made a decision. Not dramatically, not in anger, just clearly. The way you finally understand something after a long time of almost understanding it. This was not going to change. Beverly was not going to loosen her hold because I was patient and reasonable. Sylvie was not going to choose differently because I explained myself more carefully. The structure was fixed. My role in it was fixed. And I had been living inside it for 4 years, waiting for a door to open that was never going to open. I didn't say anything to Sylvie that night. I didn't say anything to Sylvie that night. I didn't say anything for several weeks. I started making plans instead. I talked to a colleague I trusted about a teaching position at a school 45 minutes away that was opening up in the spring. I started looking at apartments. I consulted a lawyer quietly, just to understand my options, just to know the shape of the path before I stepped onto it. I kept my demeanor steady at home. I was present, civil, even warm. Sylvie noticed nothing different. What I felt during those weeks was strange. Not relief yet, but something close to it. A kind of quiet that had been missing for a long time. The exhaustion of constant justification was still there, but underneath it, something settling. One Saturday morning, Sylvie mentioned she was going to her mother's for the day. I said that sounded fine. After her car left the driveway, I sat at the kitchen table with my coffee and stayed there for a while, just thinking. Then I got up and started. I'd already transferred what I needed to my own account over the preceding weeks. Nothing that was ours, only what was mine. Money I'd earned and saved before and during the marriage that I documented carefully. I left everything in our joint account untouched. I packed 1 carload: clothes, books, the things that had meaning. Everything else I left. I wasn't leaving a note. I'd thought about it and decided against it. Not out of cruelty. I left a brief message on her phone saying I was safe and that she would be hearing from my attorney, but a letter felt like another document to be handed to Beverly, analyzed, turned into evidence of my deficiencies. My silence was, for once, mine. I was at my brother's house in Portland by evening. Sylvie's calls started that night and continued for days. Then Beverly called. Then a cousin I'd met twice. I listened to none of it until a week had passed and I was settled enough to sit with the phone without my hands shaking. Sylvie's messages moved from confused to desperate to angry. In one of them, she said, "You could have just talked to me." And I thought about that for a long time, standing at my brother's kitchen window watching the rain on the street. I thought, I did talk to you. I talked to you for 4 years. Every time I talked to you, you took what I said and drove it across town to your mother's kitchen and brought back a different answer. That's not a conversation. That's a consultation process I was never invited into. I eventually sent her one email. I kept it short and factual. I was safe. I had retained representation. I was not interested in reconciliation. I wished her well, and I meant it. The divorce took 8 months. It was contentious in a way I hadn't fully prepared for. Beverly's involvement in the proceedings was not subtle, and there were moments when I sat across from my lawyer feeling the familiar sensation of being outnumbered in a room where my wife was also present. But it resolved. These things resolve. I found an apartment 2 miles from my new school. I bought a couch I'd picked out entirely by myself and sat on it the first evening listening to the silence and thinking, this is mine. Not triumphant, not bitter, just clear. Just that specific, ordinary piece of being in a space that belongs to you. I'm 53 now. I coach soccer on Saturday mornings at a community center. I have dinner with my brother and his family most weeks. I've dated a little, cautiously, and found that I know more precisely now what I'm looking for. Not a woman without family, not someone without roots, but someone who understands where the border is. Someone who loves her people and can still find her way back to herself. And to me, I think about Sylvie sometimes. I don't think about her with anger. I hope she eventually found the language for what was happening in our marriage. Not to vindicate me, I don't need that, but for her own sake. She deserved a marriage where she was a partner, not a bridge between her mother's needs and whatever was left over. I think she wanted that too. I just don't think she knew how to want it more than she needed Beverly's approval. What I know now is something it took me too long to learn. Love is not the same as loyalty, and loyalty is not the same as health. You can love someone completely and still be part of a system that slowly erodes both of you. The question isn't whether you love each other. The question is whether you're actually free to. I wasn't. And the day I understood that clearly enough to act on it was the day I started getting my life back. I've had a lot of time to think about cause and effect since all of this ended. Not in some abstract philosophical way, just practically. The way you do when you're sitting alone in a new apartment and you have nothing but quiet and your own thoughts for company. Here's what I keep coming back to. Nothing that happened was sudden. Every outcome in my marriage had a long chain of smaller choices running back behind it, most of them made years before the marriage even started. Beverly spent decades making Sylvie the center of her survival. That wasn't evil. It was fear, and loneliness, and a grief that never fully healed after she lost her husband. But the result was a daughter who learned that love meant being needed, and that being needed meant being available, and that being available meant never fully belonging to herself or to anyone else. I can't be angry at Beverly for that. I genuinely can't. What I can say is that I made my own chain of choices too, and I should look at those clearly. I chose patience when I should have chosen directness years earlier. I chose to absorb friction rather than name it. I kept telling myself I was being reasonable, and maybe I was, but I was also avoiding the harder conversation, the one that might have cost me something, the one where I said, this is not working, and it has to change, or I have to go. I said a version of that eventually, but I said it too late, after too many years of smaller surrenders. That matters. Integrity isn't just about the big moment. It's about the 100 small moments before it, where you either say the true thing or you don't. I didn't always say the true thing. I file it away, tell myself it wasn't worth the fight, and then feel the weight of it added to everything else I was carrying. That's not virtue. That's avoidance, dressed up as patience. What I learned, and this took me a long time to actually feel rather than just intellectually understand, is that self-respect is not selfishness. Asking for a marriage that belongs to the two people in it is not asking for too much. When I changed the locks, when I asked Sylvie to return her mother's key, When I said our financial information is private, I wasn't being cold or controlling. I was trying to hold a boundary that any healthy partnership requires. The fact that those requests were treated as a tax told me everything I needed to know about the system I was living inside. And here's the thing about systems like that. They don't change because you're patient. They don't change because you explain yourself well, or stay calm, or give it one more year. They change when the people inside them decide to change, and that decision has to come from them. I couldn't make that decision for Sylvie. I tried, in my way, for 4 years. Eventually, I had to accept that the most honest and courageous thing I could do was leave. Courage doesn't always look like standing your ground. Sometimes, it looks like walking away from something that is slowly making you less of who you are. I left quietly. I left without a dramatic speech or a final confrontation. Some people read that as weakness. I don't. I think it was the first truly clear-headed thing I'd done in years, choosing my own life without asking anyone's permission to do it. I'm a different person now than I was inside that marriage. Lighter, mostly. More certain of what I need and more willing to say it early. That's the only real inheritance of a hard experience. If you're paying attention, it teaches you something you couldn't have learned any other way.